Let them beg, let them bleed. And the moment they believe help is finally coming, that's the moment I want them to die. Kareem Haddad lowered his radio, smiling at the smoke rising from the trapped American position. For 8 months, he had studied these Rangers until he knew how they moved, how they thought, how they died. Today, he had built them a grave with walls on every side, and now 12 of them were bleeding out in a street he had turned into a perfect killing box, praying for a savior who would never come. But 2 miles away, on a ridge of dead rock, a woman he had never seen settled behind her rifle and heard every prayer. Before we go on, if this story moves you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because you will not believe what happens next. And in the comments, tell me the name of the city you are watching from right now, so I can see just how far the story has traveled. Captain Ethan Callahan heard the first shot before he understood it. One heartbeat, his point man was walking, checking a doorway, doing the same careful work he had done 1,000 times. The next heartbeat, he was on the ground and not moving, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that tells a soldier everything has already gone wrong. "Contact front!" Callahan shouted. "Get down, get down, get down!" His men dropped like the street had opened beneath them. And then the world exploded. Gunfire poured out of the buildings on both sides at once. Not scattered shots, not panicked fire. This was aimed, patient, coordinated, coming from windows and rooftops that had been chosen long before Ranger Team 14 ever set foot on that road. Callahan pressed himself against a low wall and felt the impacts hammering the other side of it. And in that moment, a cold understanding moved through him. They had been expected. "Doc, get to Ramirez," he yelled. "Somebody tell me where the shooter is." "Everywhere, sir," came the answer. "They're on both sides." Callahan risked a look and pulled his head back an instant before a round chewed the corner where his face had been. He had survived 3 deployments. He had walked out of places that swallowed better men whole, but he had never felt what he was feeling now, and he hated himself for feeling it, because a captain is not allowed to be afraid. "Sergeant Doyle," he called out. "Talk to me." "Ramirez is gone, sir." Doyle's voice cracked on the word gone. "He's gone. I couldn't even get to him." Callahan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. That was all he allowed himself. 1 second for a 23-year-old kid who had shown him a picture of his newborn daughter 2 nights ago. 1 second, and then he was a captain again. "Listen to me," he said, loud enough to carry over the noise. "Everybody listen. We are not staying in the open. We move to that building on the left, the one with the blue door. We move on my go, and we move together. Nobody gets left. You hear me? Nobody." "Roger that." "Copy, sir." "Doyle, you take the wounded. Perez, you and me lay down fire. Everybody else, you run and you do not stop." Callahan checked his rifle, checked his men, and felt the weight of every life crouched behind that wall pressing down on his shoulders. On 3. 1, 2. The explosion came on 3. It came from the road itself, buried under the dirt they had walked across, and it lifted the front of the squad off the ground and threw them backward like the desert had reached up with a fist. Callahan hit the wall and slid down it, ears ringing, mouth full of grit, and for a moment he could not tell which way was up. When his vision cleared, the blue door was gone. The building was gone. Their escape route was a wall of fire and rubble. "Fall back!" someone was screaming. "Fall back the other way!" But the other way had already gone dark. A second explosion answered the first, sealing the far end of the street, and Callahan understood the truth of it all at once, the way a drowning man understands water. There was no way forward. There was no way back. Every direction they might have run had been closed before they arrived. They had not walked into a firefight. They had walked into a box, and the lid had just come down. "Nobody move!" Callahan roared. "Cover! Get to cover! Use the vehicles!" His men scrambled behind the burning hulk of their own trucks, dragging the wounded, and Callahan counted heads the way a father counts children in a crowd. 11 still moving. 11 from a team that had rolled out 16 strong that morning. He did the arithmetic and his stomach turned to ice. "Higgins," he said, grabbing his radio operator by the shoulder, "get me anybody. Get me the base. Get me air. Get me the hand of God if you can reach it. Tell them we are combat ineffective and surrounded and we need extraction now." "I'm trying, sir." Higgins pressed the handset to his mouth, his hand shaking so hard he could barely hold it. Any station. Any station. This is Ranger 14. We are ambushed and surrounded. Grid follows. We have killed and wounded. We need immediate extraction. Over. He waited. Static answered. Any station. This is Ranger 14. Do you copy? Over. What are they saying? Doyle asked. Are they coming? Higgins shook his head slowly. They're jammed, sir. Somebody's jamming us. I'm getting nothing but noise. Callahan felt the words land like stones. Of course they were jammed. Of course the enemy, who had chosen this street and buried these bombs and sealed both ends, had also thought to cut the wire that led to help. This had not been a lucky ambush. This was a plan built by a patient mind, and that mind had thought of everything. Keep trying, Callahan said quietly. Keep trying anyway. Sometimes a signal slips through. He crawled to where Doc was working, and what he saw stole the breath out of him. 3 wounded, laid in a row behind the burning truck. Young Perez with a tourniquet on his leg and his face gone gray. Sergeant Kane with a wound to the belly that Doc was pressing on with both hands. And Willis, who was talking too much, talking the way men do when their bodies are betraying them faster than their minds can accept. Captain, Willis said, smiling up at him. Captain, you tell my mom I did good, okay? You tell her I didn't run. You can tell her yourself, Callahan said. We're getting out of here. Sure we are, sir. Willis kept smiling. Sure we are. Doc looked up and met the captain's eyes, and the message in that look needed no words. Not all of these men would make it. Not without a hospital, and a hospital was on the other side of an army that wanted them dead. Callahan looked away first, because he could not bear it, and because a captain is not allowed to let his men see that he already knows how this ends. How's our ammo? He asked, loud, businesslike, forcing his voice into a shape that sounded like a man in control. Low, sir, Doyle answered. Perez has maybe 2 mags. I got 3. It's like that all down the line. We fire like we've been firing. We're dry in 20 minutes. Then we don't fire like we've both been firing, Callahan said. Single shots, aimed shots. Nobody wastes a round on a shadow. We make every bullet mean something. He rose just enough to look over the wreckage, and what he saw drained the last warmth from his chest. They were moving. Out beyond the rubble, at the edges of the killing ground, dark figures were slipping from doorway to doorway, drawing closer, tightening the ring. They were not rushing. They did not have to rush. They had all the time in the world because the men in the box were going nowhere. This was the part of the hunt where the animal is already caught and the hunter simply walks in to finish it. They're closing on us, Callahan said. They're setting up for the push. Everybody ready your weapons. We hold this line as long as we can. And when we can't, Doyle asked. It was not fear in his voice. It was something worse. It was acceptance. Callahan did not answer because there was no answer he was willing to say out loud. The first probe came from the left. 2 fighters darting in, testing the Rangers' fire, seeing what teeth the trapped animal still had. Perez and Doyle put them both down, clean, and for one heartbeat there was a ragged cheer behind the trucks, the desperate joy of men who have won a single hand in a game they know they are losing. That's it, Callahan shouted. That's how we do it. Make them pay for every foot of the street. But he was counting bullets even as he cheered them on. 2 enemy dead, and it had cost them nearly a dozen rounds. There were dozens more fighters out there. He could see them now gathering, 100 meters out, more than he could ever hope to hold off with the ammunition they had left. He did the math a second time, hoping it would come out different, and it did not. Higgins crawled up beside him. Sir, I got something. For half a second, I got a carrier signal. Somebody keyed a mic near us. What did they say? Nothing, sir, just an open mic, but it means the jamming isn't perfect. There's a hole in it somewhere. Higgins looked at him with wild hope in his eyes. If I can find the hole, I can push a message through it. Then find it, Callahan said. Find it fast. The second probe was a bigger. 5 fighters this time, spread wide, moving smart, and holding the Rangers' attention on the left while a machine gun opened up from a rooftop on the right. The gun raked the trucks, punched through the metal, and Callahan heard a man scream who had not screamed before. He turned and saw Doyle down, clutching his arm, teeth bared. Doyle! I'm okay, Doyle shouted through the pain. I'm okay, sir. It went through. I can still fight. But the machine gun kept firing. And now the Rangers could not lift their heads to shoot back, and the 5 fighters on the left kept coming. And Callahan understood that this was how the box would be emptied. Pin them with the gun, rush them from the side. Simple, brutal, exactly what he would have done if he were the man on the other side of the street. "Doc," Callahan shouted, "how many can move on their own?" "4, sir, maybe 5. The rest?" Doc did not answer, and his silence was the answer. Callahan pressed his back against the smoking truck and let his head fall back for one moment. One single moment of a man at the end of his strength. He thought of his wife. He thought of his daughter, 6 years old, who had drawn him a picture of himself as a knight before he shipped out. A knight standing in front of their house with a sword, keeping the bad things away. He had folded that picture into his vest and carried it into 3 deployments. And he carried it now, and he thought, "I am sorry, baby. I am sorry. I don't think the knight is coming home." Then he lifted his head, because that was the job. That was the whole job in the end, to lift your head when there was no reason left to lift it. "Higgins," he said, "the hole in the jamming. Have you got it?" "Almost, sir, almost." Higgins was hunched over the radio, turning it slowly, chasing a whisper through a storm. Come on, there, I've got a window. What do I say, sir? What do I tell them?" And Captain Ethan Callahan, 3 deployments, 12 years in uniform, keeper of a little girl's drawing of a knight, took the handset in his hand and said the only true thing left to say. "Give me that," he said softly. He keyed the mic. His voice, when it came, was not the voice of a captain giving orders. It was the voice of a man speaking into the dark and praying the dark was listening. Anyone who can hear us. This is Ranger 14. We are surrounded. We are out of options. We have wounded who will die and men who will follow them. We have done everything we know how to do. He paused and his throat closed and he pushed through it. We need a miracle. Somebody, anybody. We need a savior, please. He released the mic. Static answered. Only static. Behind him, one of the younger Rangers, a private named Cole, who was 19 years old and had lied about being ready for this, began to pray under his breath. And around the ruined trucks, one by one, the others took it up. Not because they believed a prayer would stop a bullet, but because when a man has nothing left, a prayer is the last thing he can hold. The machine gun on the rooftop kept firing. The 5 fighters on the left kept closing. And somewhere beyond the smoke, Kareem Haddad watched his plan unfold exactly as he had designed it, and he was pleased. What none of them knew, not Callahan, not Haddad, not the terrified boy praying behind the truck, was that Ethan Callahan's broken call had not vanished into the static after all. Miles away, on a ridge of dead rock overlooking the whole city, in a position she had crawled to over 2 nights of moving only in inches, a woman lay behind a rifle and heard every word. She did not move. She did not gasp. She had trained herself long ago to keep her body still, no matter what her heart was doing, and her heart was doing it a great deal now. She listened to the captain's voice ask for a savior, and she listened to the prayers rise up behind him, and she pressed her eye to the scope and began to read the street the way another person might read a page. Her name was Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter, and she had been watching that street for 3 hours. She had watched the ambush spring. She had watched the point man fall and known, from the angle, exactly which window the sniper had fired from. She had watched the road erupt and understood that the charges had been placed by someone who knew how Rangers walked. She had counted the enemy as they gathered, marked the machine gun on the roof, tracked the RPG team moving into position behind a shell of a car, and she had built in her mind a map of the whole killing ground, every threat, every angle, every man who would have to die so that the men in the box could live. Beside her, pressed into the rock, her spotter lay with his own optic to his eye. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had been her spotter for 2 years, and he knew her well enough to know what the stillness in her jaw meant. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "there's 40 of them, at least. Maybe more we can't see. If you start shooting, every gun down there is going to be looking for us inside a minute." "I know," she said. "We were sent to find Haddad's network. To map it, to report it, not to take on a battalion with 1 rifle. I know that too." Brooks was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You heard the captain." "I heard him." 12 men, Brooks said. "Give or take. Down there right now, believing nobody's coming. Evelyn Carter did not answer right away. She was 28 years old. She had been the quietest child in a loud house, the kind of person other people forgot was in the room, and she had learned early that being unseen was not the same as being weak. She had a mentor once, an old master sergeant named William Hayes, hands like leather and eyes like a hawk, who had taken her out to a range and taught her the only thing about her craft that had ever truly mattered. A sniper does not pull the trigger because they hate the enemy, Hayes had told her. Any fool can hate. You pull the trigger because someone behind you needs to come home. You remember that, and you'll never once be a killer. You'll be the last thing standing between a family and an empty chair at their table. That's the whole job, Carter. That's the only job. She had carried those words for 6 years, through every deployment, through every shot, through every night she lay awake and did the terrible arithmetic of her work. And now, on a ridge above a dying squad, with a captain's prayer still ringing in her ears, she understood that the whole job had come to find her. "Danny," she said, "how's the wind?" Brooks went very still, because he knew what the question meant. "Evelyn, how's the wind, Sergeant Brooks?" He let out a long breath, and then he did what he always did, which was follow her, because he had learned 2 years ago that following Evelyn Carter into an impossible thing was the surest way he knew to walk back out of it. "Winds from the west," he said, 8 gusting to 12. Full value at that range. It's a long shot, Evelyn. It's the longest shot you've ever taken, and there's 40 men who'll want your blood the second you take it. "Then I'll make the first one count," she said, "so the rest of them are too busy dying to look for me." She adjusted her scope. She settled to her breathing the way Hayes had taught her, in and out, slow until the whole world narrowed to a single circle of glass and the only sound left was the sound of her own heart. And even that was slowing, quieting, going still. Down in the box, the machine gun hammered. The fighters closed. The captain held his men together with nothing but his voice. And on the ridge, a woman nobody could see took a breath and let half of it out and held the rest. "For the ones behind me," she whispered. It was what she always said. It was a promise and a prayer, and the only thing she ever yelled herself to say before the world changed. Down in the street, Higgins suddenly grabbed Callahan's arm so hard it hurt. "Sir," he said. "Sir, the radio." "What about it?" "Somebody's keying up. Somebody's on our net." Higgins's eyes were huge. "Sir, I don't recognize the call sign." The static broke, and through it, clear and calm and impossibly steady, came a voice that none of the trapped men had ever heard before. A woman's voice. A voice with no fear in it at all, the way a still lake has no waves. And something about that stillness reached into every man crouched behind those burning trucks and touched a place that the fear had not yet found. "Ranger 14, the voice said. "Ranger 14, this is Shadow 2-1. Callahan froze with the handset halfway to his mouth. Around him, the praying stopped. Even the wounded went quiet. 12 men held their breath at once. "A woman," Cole whispered. "That's a woman." "Shadow 2-1, Callahan said, hardly trusting his own voice. "Shadow 2-1, identify. Where are you? Who are you with? How many are you?" There was the briefest pause, and then the voice came back, and it did not answer any of his questions, because the answers did not matter and she knew it. It said only the thing that mattered, the thing 12 dying men had been praying to hear. "I have eyes on your position," Evelyn Carter said. "I see all of them. Every gun, every man, every angle. I want you to do something for me, Captain. And I want you to do it right now." Her voice never rose. It never wavered. It simply carried, calm and certain, into the worst moment of their lives. "I want every one of your people to get down and stay down. Get low, cover your wounded, and whatever you see happen in the next few minutes, whatever it looks like, you keep your heads down and you trust me." Callahan's mouth had gone dry. "Trust you," he said. "I don't even know who you are." "No," the voice agreed. "You don't, but you asked for a savior, Captain." And here, for the first and only time, something moved beneath the stillness of her voice. Something that was almost warm. "So get your men down and let me work." The line went quiet. Callahan stared at the handset. Then he looked at his men, at Doyle bleeding, at Doc's red hands, at Willis smiling up at a sky he could no longer see, at 19-year-old Cole with a prayer still on his lips. And Captain Ethan Callahan made a decision he could not explain and would spend the rest of his life being grateful he had made. He believed her. "You heard her," he bellowed. "Everybody down. Get low, cover the wounded, do not lift your heads, move." His men dropped, pressing themselves into the dirt, curling around the ones who could not move on their own, and a strange and total silence fell over the box. The silence of men who have handed their lives to a stranger and have nothing left to do but wait. Out beyond the trucks, the enemy saw the Rangers go still and mistook it for the end. Kareem Haddad, watching from his hidden place, keyed his own radio and gave the order he had been waiting all afternoon to give. "Now," he said, "push in, finish them." The fighters rose from their cover and began to move in for the kill. On the rooftop, the machine gunner leaned into his weapon. Behind the burned-out car, the RPG team lifted their launcher toward the trucks where the wounded lay. And on a ridge of dead stone, 2 miles and a whole world away, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter finished her breath and steadied her heart and touched the trigger with the gentlest pressure of her life. The rifle spoke once. On the rooftop, the machine gunner, who had pinned 12 men to the earth, simply stopped. His weapon fell silent. He slumped forward over the barrel and did not move again. And for a moment, none of the fighters below understood what had happened because they had heard no shot, seen no muzzle flash, felt no warning at all. One instant, their gun was alive. The next, it was dead. And the sound of the shot, when it finally rolled across the city, came so long after the gunner fell that it seemed to belong to a different world entirely. Down in the box, Callahan lifted his head 1 inch against his own orders because he could not help it. The machine gun had stopped. "Sir," Higgins breathed. "Sir, the gun stopped." And on the radio, quiet and calm and certain as the turning of the earth, the voice came once more. "That's 1, said Shadow 2-1. "Keep your heads down, Ranger 14. I'm just getting started." The second shot came before the enemy understood the first. On the ground below the dead machine gunner, the fighters were still staring up at the silent rooftop when the man beside their RPG launcher pitched sideways into the dirt. His partner, the one holding the tube, spun toward him with his mouth open to shout a name, and never finished the word, because Evelyn Carter's third round found him where he knelt. The launcher tipped over and clattered against the burned-out car, and the rocket that would have killed 6 wounded Rangers stayed exactly where it was. Down in the box, Higgins gripped the radio like it was the only solid thing in the world. "Sir, the RPG team, sir, they're down. The RPG is down. I saw it fall." "I saw it," Callahan said. He had not meant to lift his head, but he could not stop himself now. All around the killing ground, the thing he had prayed for was happening, and it was happening in a way that made no sense to any of them. There were no aircraft overhead. There was no thunder of a relief column crashing through the walls. There was only, every few seconds, one more enemy fighter folding to the ground for no reason a man could see. And then, long after, the far-off roll of a single rifle, arriving like an afterthought, like the sound was struggling to keep up with the death. "How is she doing that?" Doyle breathed. He had propped himself against the truck with his good arm, the wounded one bound tight against his chest, and he was watching the street with an expression Callahan had never seen on him before. Sir, how is one shooter doing that?" "I don't know," Callahan said. "They can't even find her," Doyle said. "Look at them, they don't know which way to run." He was right. That was the part that made grown men go quiet. The enemy was not being defeated. The enemy was being unmade, one careful piece at a time, by something they could neither see nor hear nor understand. And there is no fear on this earth like the fear of dying to a thing you cannot find. Out beyond the trucks, that fear was spreading. The first fighters to break were the ones who had pushed in closest, the ones Haddad had ordered forward to finish the trapped Americans. They had risen from their cover, certain of an easy kill, and now 3 of their number lay in the road, and the rest could not tell where the shots were coming from. One of them turned to run and made it 4 steps before the desert reached up and took him. Another dropped his rifle and pressed himself flat against a wall and stayed there, shaking, praying to a God he had not spoken to in years. And that man lived only because Evelyn had already moved her scope to a target that still had a weapon in his hands. She was not firing at the frightened ones, Brooks understood that before anyone else did, watching through his own optic beside her on the ridge. "You're leaving the runners," he said. "The runners aren't shooting at those rangers," Evelyn answered, and worked the bolt and settled again. "I don't have bullets to waste on men who already quit." 20 seconds since your first shot," Brooks said. His voice had dropped into the flat, fast rhythm the two of them fell into when the work got hot, the rhythm of two people who had done this so many times they had become almost one mind. Rooftop, gun team, RPG, and 3 on the ground. 6 down. They're starting to look up. Here, Evelyn. Not right at us, but up. "Let them look up," she said. "Up is a big place." She breathed out. "Give me the man in the gray by the doorway. He's got a radio." Man in gray, doorway, 440, winds holding. Evelyn found him. He was pressed into a recessed door, half hidden, speaking urgently into a handset. And even at that distance, even through a circle of glass, she could read the thing in his posture that told her he mattered. Frightened men held their radios like they wanted to throw them away. This man held his like a lifeline, like it connected him to something bigger than himself. That made him a link in the chain she had spent weeks learning to break. She sent the shot. The man in gray slid down the doorframe, and his radio tumbled from his hand and lay in the dust, still keyed open, hissing. 7, Brooks said. Miles away in a low building that had not seen an American in a year, Kareem Haddad heard that 7th man die. He heard it the way a spider feels a strand of its web go slack. One of his relay men, the one who was supposed to be coordinating the northern push, simply stopped answering. Haddad keyed his own radio and said the man's name, and got nothing, and said it again, and got the soft hiss of an open mic, and faint beneath it, the sound of something he had not heard in a very long time, the sound of his own plan coming apart. Haddad was not a stupid man. He had not built a network that killed Rangers for 8 straight months by being stupid. He had studied the Americans until he knew them better than they knew themselves, learned their patrol rhythms and their radio habits and the exact way their officers thought under pressure, and he had used all of it to build the box on that street, the finest piece of work he had ever done. And now, watching that work dissolve, he understood 2 things at once, and both of them frightened him. The first was that his men were not being beaten by the trapped Rangers. Those Rangers had not moved. They were still pressed into the dirt behind their trucks exactly where he had pinned them. The second was that whoever was killing his fighters was doing it from a distance so great that his men could not shoot back, could not even find the shooter, and was choosing targets with a precision that told Haddad this was not luck and not many guns, but one gun, one shooter, one patient in terrible mind that had been watching his operation long enough to know which of his men mattered and which did not. "A sniper," he said aloud to no one, and then more quietly with something that was almost respect and almost fear. One sniper. He had built his whole reputation on being the hunter, on knowing his prey. It had never once occurred to him that somewhere out in the rock and the heat, something had been hunting him. Back in the box, Callahan had made a decision. "Higgins," he said, "get me Shadow 2-1. "Sir?" "Get her on the net, now." Higgins keyed the radio with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "Shadow 2-1, Shadow 2-1, this is Ranger 14. Do you copy? Over." There was a pause, 3 seconds, 4, and Callahan felt his stomach drop. Because in 3 seconds, a man's mind can build a whole nightmare, and his built the worst one. That she was gone, that they had found her, that the voice that had reached into the box and given them back their hope had been silenced. Then the radio broke, and the calm came back into the world. "Ranger 14, Shadow 2-1, go ahead." Callahan let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "Shadow 2-1, I need to know what you need from me. My men can fight. We were low on ammunition, but we are not out. You give me a direction, and we will hit them from the ground while you hit them from wherever you are. Just tell me where." "Negative, Ranger 14. Her answer came fast and flat and left no room in it for argument. "You keep your people down. Every one of your men who lifts a weapon right now is a man the enemy can see, and a man the enemy can see is a man I can't protect. Right now, they don't know how many of you are still alive. That doubt is worth more to you than your bullets are. Stay down. Stay quiet. Let them keep guessing." "I've got wounded who need extraction," Callahan said. I've got men who won't last another hour. The pause this time was different, shorter. And when the voice came back, there was something under the calm, something Callahan couldn't name yet, but would understand later. The sound of a person carrying a weight she had chosen to carry alone. I know, Captain, Evelyn said. I know exactly how long your men have. That's why I'm working as fast as I am. You get your wounded stable, and you keep them breathing, and you hold on. I am going to open you a door. When it opens, you will know, and you will move fast, and you will not look back. Until then, you trust me. Can you do that? Callahan looked at Willis, who had stopped smiling now, whose breathing had gone shallow and slow. He looked at Doc, whose hands had not left Kane's belly for 20 minutes. He looked at the ring of enemy that had been closing on them and was now, impossibly, backing away, breaking apart, dying. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, I can do that. Good man. A beat. Now put your head back down before you make a liar out of me. Callahan almost laughed. He had not thought he would ever laugh again. He ducked back behind the truck, and around him his men were watching him, and he saw in their faces that something had changed. The prayers had stopped. The waiting to ding had stopped. In its place was a thing more dangerous to an enemy than any weapon. The thing Haddad had tried so hard to take from them, and had, for a few terrible minutes, succeeded in taking. Hope. She's real, Cole said, wonder in his young voice. Sir, she's real. She's actually out there. She's real, Callahan agreed. Now keep low and keep quiet, all of you. We do our part. Our part is staying alive. On the ridge, Brooks was reading his watch. 2 minutes since your first shot. 7 down. And Evelyn, I'm telling you, they're organizing. The panic's burning off. Somebody down there is getting them back under control. Haddad, she said, you can't know that. I can. She was tracking the street slowly, patiently, reading the movement of men the way she had spent weeks learning to read it. Watch how they're moving now. 10 seconds ago, they were a mob. Now they're pulling into cover in pairs, covering each other's angles, keeping low. That's not fear. That's a leader. Somebody just started giving orders, and they're good orders, and there's only one man down there good enough to give them. Brooks was quiet a moment. Then he said the thing they were both thinking. If he's giving orders, he's got a radio. If he's got a radio, he's transmitting. Yes. Higgins on the Ranger net said the jamming's got holes in it. Their signals are leaking. If we can pull Haddad's transmissions out of the noise, we can direction find him. We can find where he's sitting. Evelyn Carter allowed herself, for exactly 1 second, to feel the thing she had been holding down since the moment the ambushes sprang. She had come to this ridge to map Haddad's network, to find him, to end the machine that had been killing Rangers for 8 months. And now the machine had walked into the open and started giving orders, and every order was a thread leading straight back to the spider at the center of the web. Then let's find him, different that you said. But those Rangers come first. Every one of them walks out of that street before I so much as think about Haddad. That's the job, Danny. The ones behind us come first. Always. Always, Brooks agreed. He shifted his optic back to the killing ground. Then let's get them in their door. What's your plan? Her plan was cruel in its simplicity, and it was the plan of someone who had studied these men until she knew how they would react to their own fear. They're regrouping toward the west end of the street, she said, where the second charge blew. That's their strong side now. That's where their leader is pulling them, which means the east end, where they're weakest, is where the door has to be. But right now, the east end is covered by 2 positions, a shooter in the second floor window of the corner building and a 2-man team behind the rubble pile at the mouth of the alley. She breathed. I take those 3, the east end is open, and the Rangers can move out that way toward the wadi. From the wadi, they can reach the road, and from the road, extraction can reach them. 3 shots, Brooks said, the window and the 2 behind the rubble. 3 shots. The window's the problem. He's set back in the room. You've got maybe a foot of him showing, and only when he leans to shoot. Then I'll take him when he leans, Evelyn said, and settled in to wait. Waiting was the part no one understood about her work. People imagined the shot, the crack of the rifle, the enemy falling. No one imagined the stillness before it, the endless patient minutes of a person holding herself motionless, while her own heart begged her to move. Evelyn had made herself the master of that stillness. She lay behind her rifle and did not move and did not blink more than she had to. And she watched the black rectangle of that second-floor window and waited for a man to make the one mistake that would cost him everything. 20 seconds, Brooks murmured, keeping her in the rhythm. 30, he's cautious. He knows something's wrong out there. He's not leaning. He'll lean, she said. The Rangers are his target. Sooner or later, he has to look at his target. She was right. At 40 seconds, the shooter in the window leaned into his rifle to check on the trapped Americans, and for 1.5 seconds, a foot of his shoulder and the side of his head crossed the open air of the window frame. And 1.5 seconds was more time than Evelyn Carter had ever needed. The rifle spoke. The window went dark. 8, Brooks said. East end, 2 behind the rubble. They're close together, Evelyn. If you're fast on the bolt, you might get both before the second one reacts. Watch me. She had trained her whole career for the shot that came next, the shot that most people never manage in a lifetime. 2 targets close together, the second one alive and thinking in the half second after the first one dies. The trick to it was not speed of the finger. The trick was that the second shot had to already be planned, already aimed, already breathing, before the first one was fired, so that the recoil settled the rifle almost exactly where the second target was, and the shooter had only to correct an inch and press again. The first man behind the rubble died. In the half second before his partner could do more than begin to turn his head, Evelyn worked the bolt, corrected, and fired again. The second man died beside the first. Both, Brooks breathed. Both of them. Clean. That's 10. And Evelyn, the east end is open. There's nothing covering it. The door's open. Then let's send them through it. She keyed her radio, and her voice went out across the net, into the box, into the ears of 12 men who had learned in the last 5 minutes to listen for it, the way you listen for the voice of someone you love. Ranger 14, Shadow 2-1. Your door is open, east end of the street, past the corner building. Move now, move fast, move quiet, and do not stop until you reach the dry riverbed beyond it. I have your backs. Go. Callahan did not hesitate. He had learned to trust the voice, and now he bet all their lives on it. You heard her. East end, move, move, move. Doc, get the wounded up. Everybody carries somebody. Nobody left behind. Perez, Doyle, on me. We cover the rear. Go, go, go. And Ranger Team 14 came up out of the dirt where they had been dying, and they moved. It was not clean. Nothing in that street was clean. Men who had been lying still for 20 minutes came up on legs that shook. The wounded cried out as they were lifted. Willis, barely conscious, was carried between 2 men with his arms over their shoulders and his boots dragging. But they moved, all of them, east, toward the door a stranger had cut open for them with nothing but a rifle and a promise. And the enemy saw them move. A shout went up from the west end. Kareem Haddad, watching his prey break for the one gap in his box, understood in an instant what had been done to him. The east end had been sealed. He had sealed it himself, placed those 3 men himself, and now all 3 were dead, and the door was open, and the Americans were pouring through it, and he had not heard a single one of the shots that killed his men. The alley! Haddad's voice cracked across his own net, and this time there was something in it that had not been there before. Something raw. They're breaking east. Cut them off. Get to the alley. Do not let them reach the wadi. Fighters peeled off from the west end and ran east, cutting through side streets, racing to close the door before the last ranger could pass through it. And on the ridge, Evelyn Carter saw them come. Runners, Brooks said sharply. 6, no, 8 of them, moving to cut off the rangers at the alley mouth. They'll beat the wounded there, Evelyn. The rangers carrying the wounded are too slow. They'll reach the alley the same time the enemy does. No, they won't, Evelyn said, because the enemy isn't going to reach the alley. What she did in the next 90 seconds, Brooks would talk about for the rest of his life, in the low voice men use for the things they saw that they still don't fully believe. She did not panic, and she did not rush, and she did not fire a single wasted round. She read the 8 running men, and she read the ground they had to cross, and she found the 2 choke points they all had to pass through, 2 narrow gaps between buildings where the runners were funneled into single file, and she waited at those gaps with her rifle the way a person waits at a door, and she took them as they came. One at the first gap. The men behind him piled up, hesitated, and lost 3 precious seconds deciding whether to run through a space where their friend had just died. Then 2 of them ran it anyway, and neither one reached the far side. 3 at the first gap, Brooks counted. They're going for the second one now. They're trying the other route. I know, Evelyn said, already shifting, already breathing, already there. I've got the second gap. She took 2 more at the second gap. And the last 3, the final 3 runners racing to close the door on 12 exhausted Americans, stopped. They simply stopped, pressed themselves into whatever cover they could find, and refused to move. Because every man who had tried to reach that alley in the last 90 seconds was dead, and no order from any commander was worth crossing that ground. The door stayed open. And Ranger Team 14, every one of them, the walking and the wounded and the ones carried between other men's shoulders, passed through it and vanished into the dry riverbed beyond. They're through, Brooks said, and there was something thick in his voice. Evelyn, they're through, all of them. They made the wadi. Every man who was alive when this started is still alive. You did it. You actually did it. Evelyn Carter let out a long, slow breath, and only then did she let herself feel how fast her heart had been beating the whole time, hammering behind her ribs while her hands stayed still as stone. She did not celebrate. She never celebrated. She lay behind her rifle and she looked through her scope at the killing ground she had emptied. And she did the arithmetic she always did, the terrible quiet arithmetic that no metal would ever touch. 15 enemy dead. 15. Each of them a man. Each of them somewhere, a son, a brother, maybe a father. She did not hate them. Hayes had taught her never to hate them, but she had ended 15 lives in the space of 6 minutes, and she would carry every one of them the way she carried all the others in the place inside her where she kept the cost of her work. And balanced against those 15, on the other side of the scale, 12 American men who were going home, 12 chairs that would not stand empty, 12 families who would never get the visit and the folded flag and the words "we regret to inform you." For the ones behind me, she had said, that was the whole job. That was the only job. Down in the wadi, Higgins keyed the radio one more time, and his voice, when it came across the net, was not the flat professional voice of a soldier making a report. It was cracked and wet and human. Shadow 2-1, he said. Shadow 2-1, this is Ranger 14. We're clear. We're all clear. Every man. We're in the wadi, and we've got a route to the extraction point. He stopped, swallowed, started again. Ma'am, there aren't words. You saved 12 men who had nothing left. Whoever you are, whatever you are, thank you from all of us. Thank you. There was a long silence on the net, long enough that Callahan, listening, wondered if she had already gone, already melted back into the rock she had come out of. And then the voice came one last time, and it was quieter than it had been. And for the first time since it had entered their lives, there was something almost human in it, something tired and warm and very far away. You don't owe me thanks, Ranger 14, Evelyn Carter said. You owe your families a hug when you get home. That's all I ever wanted from any of this. Now get to your extraction. Get your wounded to a hospital. And live good lives, all of you. That's the payment. That's the only one I take. Shadow 2-1, will we ever know who you are? The pause, and then so soft they almost missed it beneath the hiss of the failing jammer, the answer. No, she said, you won't, and that's all right. The best thing I do where no one can see it. He breathed. Go home, Captain. Take your men home. The net went quiet, and this time it stayed quiet. In the wadi, Callahan lowered the handset and looked at his men, at the exhausted, filthy, weeping, living faces of the men he had been certain he would watch die, and he could not speak. Doyle put his good hand on the captain's shoulder. Cole was crying openly and did not care who saw. Doc had finally taken his hands off Kane's belly, because they had reached a place where he could rig a proper line, where Kane might actually live. And the young medic was staring back at the ruined street with an expression like a man who has seen something he will spend his life trying to explain to people who were not there. Who was she, sir? Cole asked. Who was that? Callahan looked back at the ridgeline, the far dead rock where somewhere, invisible, a woman was already breaking down her position and preparing to disappear. I don't know, son, he said. I don't think we're supposed to know. But Kareem Haddad wanted very badly to know. In his low building at the West End, he stood over his radio and listened to the silence where 15 of his men used to be, and for the first time in 8 months of hunting Americans, Kareem Haddad felt something cold move through him that he recognized distantly as fear. His finest work had been undone in 6 minutes by a single shooter he had never seen, a ghost on a ridge who had picked his men apart with a patience that mirrored his own, who had left the cowards alive and killed the leaders, who had understood his plan well enough to find the one door and open it. That kind of understanding did not come from luck. It came from study. It came from someone who had been watching him, learning him, mapping his network for a long time. Someone had been hunting the hunter. Haddad picked up his radio and gave a new order, and this one was not about the Rangers who had escaped. This one was colder and more personal, and it would set the whole rest of the war in motion. Find the shooter, he said. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs. Somewhere out in that rock is one person who did this to us. Find out who they are. Find out where they came from, and bring them to me. He looked out toward the ridgeline, toward the empty rock where his enemy had lain, and he spoke the last words very quietly, almost to himself. Whoever you are, you've made this personal, and I am very, very good at personal. Far away on the ridge, Evelyn Carter finished packing her position, took one last look at the emptied street through her scope, and began the long crawl back the way she had come, moving in inches, patient as the earth, a woman nobody had seen who had just changed the entire war and did not yet know the price it would demand from her. The crawl back took her the rest of that day and most of the night. Evelyn Carter moved the way she had been taught, the way that kept snipers alive when everything else failed, in inches, in patience, never once giving the ridge a shape a searching eye could catch. Behind her, Brooks moved the same way, and neither of them spoke for hours, because sound carried in that dead country, and Haddad's men were already out looking. She could feel them looking. She had spent enough time hunting to know the feeling of being hunted, and it had settled onto her shoulders the moment she took her first shot and did not lift off again. They reached the hide site an hour before dawn, a shallow cut in the rock 40 minutes from where she had fired, stocked days earlier with water and food, and a radio that could reach the base. Only when they were inside it, folded into the dark, did Brooks finally let himself speak. And what he said was not what she expected. They're going to come for you, that he said. You know that. I know. 15 men, Evelyn, his best 15, his gun team, his RPG team, his relay man, the shooters he'd placed himself. You didn't just beat him, you embarrassed him in front of every fighter he's got. Brooks was quiet a moment. A man like Haddad, that's not a defeat he walks away from. That's a wound. He's going to spend everything he has finding out who you are. Then he'll find out I'm somebody who came for his network and got 12 Rangers out along the way. Evelyn pulled her water toward her and drank, slow the way you drink when you don't know when the next chance will come. Let him look. Looking is what I want him doing. Every man he sends to find me is a man not setting a trap on some patrol road. Brooks studied her in the gray dark. 2 years he had spotted for her, and he still could not always tell what was going on behind that stillness. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using the shot I took as bait, she corrected. There's a difference. The shot's already fired. Might as well make it do double work. But something in Brooks did not settle, and later when she thought back on it, Evelyn would understand that his instinct had been right, that he had felt the shape of what was coming before she let herself feel it. Because Kareem Haddad was not going to hunt her the way she expected. He was not going to send men into the rock to find a ghost. He was cleverer than that, and crueler, and he had already understood the one thing about her that she guarded most carefully, the thing that made her strong and would very nearly destroy her. He had understood that she came for the ones behind her. At the base, Ranger Team 14 was pulled off the extraction bird and swallowed by the machine of the wounded and the debriefed. Willis went straight into surgery and lived, barely, because a medic's hands and a sniper's mercy had bought him just enough time. Kane lived. Doyle's arm was broken clean through and would mend. Every man who had been alive in that street was up at the base, and word of it moved through the whole compound faster than any order. The story of Ranger 14 and the voice on the radio and the ghost who had emptied a killing ground with a single rifle. Captain Ethan Callahan told the story to the officers who debriefed him exactly as it had happened, and he watched them not believe him. Not out loud, but he saw it in their faces. The careful blankness of men listening to something that could not be true. One shooter, 15 enemy, no air support, no reaction force, no wire to any command element they could name. A call sign, Shadow 2-1, that appeared on none of their operational rosters. You're saying an American sniper you can't identify, working a mission you have no record of, saved your entire team, the colonel said. I'm saying that's what happened, sir. Captain, do you understand how that sounds? I understand exactly how it sounds, sir, Callahan said. I'd have said the same thing to any man who tried to tell it to me. Right up until she got on my net and told my men to keep their heads down, and then killed everyone who was trying to kill us, one at a time, from somewhere none of us could see. He leaned forward. Somebody knew we were going to be hit, sir. Somebody knew before we did. And somebody put a shooter on a ridge to be there when it happened. I don't know who she is. I don't need to know. But she was real, and she was ours. And if this command has any decency at all, it will find out who she is, and it will give her whatever she wants for the rest of her life. The colonel said nothing for a long moment. Then he closed the folder in front of him. That'll be all, Captain. But it was not all. And Callahan knew it was not all, because when he walked out of that room, he could not let it go. Somebody had known. That was the piece that would not leave him alone. The ambush on that street had been too perfect, the box too complete, the timing too exact. Haddad had not gotten lucky. Haddad had known the patrol route, and a patrol route was not the kind of thing an enemy guessed. It was the kind of thing an enemy was told. There was a leak, somewhere inside the wire, somewhere close. Someone was feeding Ranger movements to Kareem Haddad. And the same thought that was keeping Callahan awake was 40 minutes out in the rock, keeping Evelyn Carter awake too. She had known about the leak for weeks. It was, in a way, why she was there. The classified assignment that had put her on that ridge had not come through the normal chain. It had come quiet and sideways, from a man she trusted, a colonel named Marcus Whitfield, who had known her mentor Hayes and had watched Evelyn come up through the sniper program. Whitfield had brought her in personally, in a room with no windows, and told her the thing the official reports would not say. Rangers were dying in Al-Mazrah at a rate that made no sense. The enemy was always in the right place at the right time. Somebody was giving Haddad the Rangers' movements, and whoever it was sat close enough to the operations to know patrol routes before they were flown. Find Haddad's network, Whitfield had told her. Map it, and find me the leak, Carter, because until we find the leak, every Ranger in that sector is walking to a funeral he doesn't know he's scheduled. She had been 3 weeks into that mission, watching, learning Haddad's patterns, when Ranger 14 walked into the box. And when Callahan's broken voice came across her scanner asking for a savior, she had faced the hardest choice of her career, because taking those shots meant blowing weeks of quiet work, revealing herself, turning herself from a hunter into a target. She had taken them anyway. She had never once regretted it. But she had known, even as she fired, that she was trading her invisibility for those 12 lives, and that the trade would come due. It came due 4 days later. Brooks brought her the news over the radio at dawn, his voice flat in the way it went flat when the thing he was saying was too big to say with feeling. There had been a raid. A team of Rangers acting on intelligence had hit a compound they'd been told was one of Haddad's weapons caches. It had not been a weapons cache. It had been a trap, laid the same careful way the street had been laid, and 4 Rangers had died walking into it. 4, Brooks said, and Evelyn, the intelligence that sent them in. It was clean. It came through channels. It looked exactly like everything else that comes through channels. Evelyn was very still. The leak. The leak, Brooks confirmed. Haddad's not just getting patrol routes anymore. He's feeding false intelligence back into our own system. He's using our own network to kill us. Whoever's inside the wire, they're not just watching now, they're aiming. And that was the twist that changed everything. The thing that turned Evelyn Carter's mission from a hunt into something far more dangerous. Because if the leak could feed false intelligence into the American system, then the leak could feed false intelligence about her. The leak could paint her as a threat, could bury her mission, could turn her own side against her with a few well-placed words in the right ears. She was working a classified assignment that only a handful of people knew about, out in the rock alone, And somewhere inside the wire was a person who served Haddad and who now had every reason in the world to want Evelyn Carter dead or discredited, or both. "Danny," she said, "who knew about my mission?" Brooks understood the question, and he did not like it. Whitfield's aide, whoever cut the orders, a handful of people, tops. "Evelyn, you're not saying you can't be saying that the leak knows about you. I'm saying that a killing box was built for Ranger 14 on a route they should never have taken, and a ghost showed up and tore it apart. And 4 days later, somebody used our own intelligence system to walk 4 more Rangers into a trap." Her voice was quiet, controlled, but Brooks had spotted for her long enough to hear the thing moving underneath it. "The leak is escalating, and the leak is close to the same channel that sent me here. I need to talk to Whitfield, on a line I trust, because if the leak knows about me, then the next false intelligence packet that comes through our system might have my grid coordinates on it and a reaction force with my name flagged as hostile." It took 2 days to reach Whitfield securely, 2 days during which Evelyn and Brooks moved their hide site twice because the feeling of being hunted had sharpened into something with edges. Twice they saw Haddad's men in the distance, moving in the patient, searching pattern of people who had been told exactly what to look for. Not sweeping randomly, searching as if someone had told them which quarter of the rock to search in. That detail sat in Evelyn's chest like a stone. Someone had told them where to look, and only a very small number of people knew, even roughly, where she was. When Whitfield finally came on the secure line, his voice was tight in a way she had never heard from him. "Carter, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. You need to listen to me, and you need to listen fast, because I don't know how long this line stays clean." "I'm listening, sir." "That business on the street, Ranger 14, that was you." "Yes, sir. I know it was you, because I've spent 3 days fighting to keep your mission alive, and losing." Whitfield's breath came ragged down the line. "Somebody's moving against you, Carter. Inside. There are people in this command who've decided that an unaccounted sniper operating on the battlefield without a clear chain is a liability. They're building a case. Rogue operator. Off the reservation. They want you pulled in, and there's a faction that wants you pulled in hard." "That's the leak, sir," Evelyn said. "That's Haddad's man inside the wire. He's not trying to find me in the rock. He's trying to find me through you. Turn my own side against me. Get the army to do the work Haddad can't." There was a silence on the line, and in it Evelyn heard Whitfield arrive at the same terrible place she had already reached. "That's why the false intelligence," Whitfield said slowly. "The trap that killed those 4 Rangers. It wasn't only about the Rangers. It was about discrediting the intelligence picture, muddying the water, so that when I stand up and say Carter's mission is real and sanctioned, there's just enough chaos in the system that nobody believes me. He's not just hunting you, Carter. He's isolating you, cutting you off from the one man who can vouch for you." "Then we find him first," Evelyn said. "Sir, I need everything. Everyone who's had eyes on my mission file. Everyone who's touched my orders. Everyone who was in the room. Because the leak is one of them. And the leak is the thread that leads back to Haddad. And I am going to pull that thread until the whole thing comes apart." Whitfield was quiet. Then he said the thing that made her blood run cold. "There were 4 people who knew the specifics of your mission, Carter. Me, my aide, Captain Reyes, the officer who cut your orders, a Major Sorensen in operations, and one more, Tpano." He paused. "The intelligence officer who first flagged the pattern of Ranger deaths. The one who brought the whole problem to my attention in the first place. The one who convinced me we needed someone like you out there." Another pause. Longer. Heavier. "A man named Warrant Officer Elias Vance." The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but the shape of it meant everything. "The man who identified the leak," she said slowly, "was one of only 4 people who knew about the sniper sent to find it. Yes. The man who convinced you the Rangers needed saving is one of 4 people who could feed Haddad at exactly where their savior would be." "Carter." Whitfield's voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I've known Vance for a year. He's the one who saw the pattern nobody else saw. He's the one who cared when everybody else was writing those deaths off as bad luck. If it's him, then he built this whole thing. The pattern he flagged, the mission he pushed for, the sniper he helped send. He didn't identify the leak, Carter. He is the leak, and he's been steering us the entire time. Out in the rock, Evelyn Carter closed her eyes, and the pieces she had been carrying for weeks slid into place with a click she felt in her teeth. The perfect ambush on Ranger 14. The route they should never have taken. The false intelligence that killed four more. The searchers who knew which quarter of the rock to hunt. The faction inside the wire building, a case to pull her in. It was not four separate problems. It was one man, one patient, and brilliant and utterly ruthless man, working both sides of the wire, feeding the Rangers to Haddad and feeding Haddad to the Rangers, engineering the deaths and then positioning himself as the one who cared enough to stop them. He had built the crisis and then built himself into the solution, and in doing so had reached his hand around the entire operation, including the one sniper sent to find him. He had helped send her out here, which meant he had always intended to use her. And now that she had shown him what she could do on that street, she had become the most dangerous piece on his board and the most important one to remove. He's going to try to kill me, Evelyn said quietly, not with Haddad's men, through the system. He's going to feed false intelligence that flags my position as a hostile shooter, and he's going to let an American reaction force do what Haddad's fighters couldn't. I won't let that happen, Whitfield said fiercely. I will stand in front of that reaction force myself, Carter. I swear to God. No, sir, you won't. Because the moment you stand up for me, you confirm to Vance that you're the last obstacle, and then he comes for you, too. Evelyn's mind was moving fast now, faster than it had moved on the ridge. The same cold clarity she found behind the rifle spreading through the whole problem. Here's what's going to happen, sir. You are going to do nothing. You are going to act like the case against me is working. You are going to let Vance believe he's winning. Because a man who believes he's winning gets careless. And while he's busy being careless, I am going to find Kareem Haddad, and I am going to end him. And I am going to make sure that when Haddad falls, the whole network falls with him, including the thread that leads back through the wire to Warrant Officer Elias Vance. Carter, my God, that's you against both of them. Haddad in the field and Vance inside the wire, alone. Not alone, sir. I've got Brooks, and I've got the one thing neither of them has. She opened her eyes. They both think this is about hunting me. It's not. It never was. This is about the 12 men I got out of that street and the 4 I couldn't save, and every ranger in this sector who's still walking to a funeral he doesn't know about. That's what I'm fighting for. And a person who's fighting for the ones behind her will always outlast a man who's only fighting for himself. She ended the call before Whitfield could argue, and she sat in the dark of the hide site and let the enormity of it settle over her. She was hunting a man in the field who had sworn to find her. She was hunting a man inside the wire who had helped send her out to die. Either one could kill her. Together, working the way they had been working, feeding each other, they had already killed more Rangers than she could count, and they would kill more, and they would very likely kill her, because they held every advantage that mattered. They knew who she was. She had only just learned who they were. But she had learned it. That was the thing. For weeks they had moved in the dark, certain no one saw them. And now, at last, someone did. The hunter had a face, 2 faces. And Evelyn Carter, who had spent her whole life being the quietest person in the room, the one everyone forgot was there, had built her entire craft on the power of being unseen while she saw everything. Danny, she said, change of mission. Brooks looked at her across the dark. I'm listening. We were sent to map Haddad's network and find the leak. We found both. The network runs through Haddad in the field. The leak is a man named Vance, inside the wire, and he's the one who sent us out here to die. She said it flatly and watched Brooks absorb the betrayal, watched his jaw tighten. Whitfield can't move without exposing himself. The command's building a case to pull us in as rogue, so we don't get pulled in. We finish the mission before they can. We take down Haddad, we break the network, and we make sure the trail leads straight to Vance so loud that nobody, not one soul in that command can pretend they don't see it. 2 men, Brooks said, one in the field, one in the wire, both of them expecting us. And a clock running, because the second the command flags as hostile, every friendly in this sector is a threat too. He was quiet a moment. Then, despite everything, the corner of his mouth moved. You know, when I signed on to spot for you, I thought it'd be a lot more lying in the dirt and a lot less getting hunted by my own side. You can walk away, Danny, Evelyn said, and she meant it. This isn't the mission you signed on for. Nobody would blame you. Yeah, Brooks said. See, that's the thing about following you, Carter. You always give me the door, and I never once want to take it. He settled back down behind his optic and put his eye to the glass. So, Kareem Haddad, where do we find a man who's spent 8 months making sure nobody can? Evelyn Carter looked out at the dead rock, at the city beyond it where 12 men had almost died, and where a spider still sat at the center of a web that ran all the way back through the wire to a trader's desk. We don't find him, she said. We make him come to us. To us. He wants the shooter who beat him on that street. He wants her badly enough to burn his whole network to get her. A slow breath. So we give him what he wants. We give him the shooter. And when he comes for her, with everything he's got, we'll be waiting. All of us. Every ranger in this sector who's tired of walking to funerals. Because Haddad thinks he's hunting one woman on a ridge. Her hand moved to her rifle, sure and quiet in the dark. He's about to find out he woke up the whole sector, and every single one of them owes a debt to the ghost he's trying to kill. Far away inside the wire, in an office with a nameplate that read Elias Vance, a man sat looking at a map of Al-Mazrah with a red circle drawn around a quarter of the rock, and he smiled the patient smile of a man who had been winning for 8 months and did not yet know that, 4 days earlier, on a street he had built into a grave, he had finally made the one mistake that would cost him everything. He had reached for 12 lives, and a woman he had helped send into the dark had reached back and taken hold and was not going to let go. The plan to trap Kareem Haddad began with the one man who had earned the right to help build it. Evelyn had Brooks reach out to Ranger Base Phoenix through a channel Whitfield swore was clean, and she asked for exactly one person by name, Captain Ethan Callahan. Not the colonel who had doubted him, not the operations staff that might, for all she knew, run reports across the desk of a warrant officer named Vance. Just the man who had trusted a voice on the radio with the lives of his whole team, because a man who could do that in the worst moment of his life was a man who could be trusted with the truth now. When Callahan finally got the message that Shadow 2-1 wanted to speak with him, on a secure line, alone, he went so still that the Rangers around him asked if he was all right. He was more than all right. For 4 days, he had carried the question of who she was like a stone in his chest, and now the stone had spoken. This is Callahan, he said into the handset, and his voice was not entirely steady. Ma'am, is this really you? It's me, Captain. That same calm, that same stillness under pressure that had reached into the box and given 12 men their lives back. How are your wounded? Alive, all of them. Willis is going to keep his leg. Kane's going to see his kids again. Doyle won't stop telling everyone about the ghost who saved us. He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone thick. You gave me my whole team back. Whatever you need from me, ma'am, for the rest of my life, the answer is yes. You don't even have to finish asking. I'm going to hold you to that, Evelyn said, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear and harder to believe. And I need you to hear all of it before you decide anything. She told him. All of it. The leak inside the wire. The false intelligence that had killed 4 Rangers in a compound that was never a weapons cache. The faction building a case to have her pulled in as a rogue operator. And the name. Warrant Officer Elias Vance. The man who had first flagged the pattern of Ranger deaths. The man everyone believed was the one who cared. The man who had, in truth, engineered every one of those deaths and then built himself into the solution. Callahan was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had changed entirely, gone flat and cold and furious. Vance. He said the name like it tasted foul. Elias Vance. He briefs us, ma'am. He's briefed my team. He shook my hand at the memorial for Ramirez. He stood there with his hand on my shoulder and told me he'd find whoever set us up. A pause, and Evelyn could hear the man on the other end of the line fighting to keep his hands from shaking. He built the trap that killed my point man. He built the box. And then he shook my hand at the funeral. Yes, Evelyn said quietly, he did. How sure are you? Sure enough that I've bet my life on it, she said. There were 4 people who knew about my mission. Only one of them also flagged the pattern, pushed to send a sniper, and had the access to feed Haddad the routes. It's him, Captain, and here's the part that matters to you. He's not finished. Right now, he's got two problems left. Me and Colonel Whitfield, the one man who can vouch for what I'm doing out here. Vance is going to try to remove us both, and he's going to use your own chain of command to do it, which means the clock is running for all of us. Then tell me how to help you end him, Callahan said. Tell me what you need. And Evelyn Carter laid out the plan she had been building in the dark of the hide site, the plan that turned every advantage Haddad and Vance held against them. They both believed they were hunting her. Good. She would let them hunt. She would let herself be found on ground of her own choosing, ground that looked to Haddad like the perfect place to finally corner the ghost who had humiliated him. Vance would feed Haddad her position because Vance wanted her dead as badly as Haddad did, and the two of them would pour everything they had into the trap. And when they did, when Haddad committed his whole remaining force to killing one woman on a ridge, they would find that the ridge was not defended by one woman at all. Every sniper team you can get me, Evelyn said. Quietly, off the books. Men you trust with your life, because if word of this reaches the operations desk, Vance sees it, and the whole thing dies. I need shooters who can hold a position and wait. I need the base itself ready to receive an assault, because Haddad won't send a patrol, he'll send everything. And when everything is committed in one place, that's when a network becomes a target instead of a ghost. She let that settle. We don't chase Haddad, Captain. We make him bring his entire operation to one piece of ground, and then we take the whole thing off the board in a single night. And Vance? Vance is the thread that ties it together. When Haddad commits, he'll be transmitting, coordinating, and he'll be doing it through the same leak he's always used. Whitfield's going to be listening on the inside. The moment Vance feeds Haddad my position, Whitfield has him, caught in the act, with his hand on the wire in front of witnesses Vance can't discredit. Evelyn's voice hardened. Haddad falls in the field. Vance falls in the wire. Same night, same operation. One pulls the other down. Callahan was quiet, absorbing the size of it. Then he said, "It's a good plan, ma'am, but it only works if Haddad takes the bait. If he doesn't commit everything, if he holds part of his force back, then we've shown our whole hand for nothing, and he slips away to kill Rangers for another 8 months. He'll commit everything," Evelyn said, and there was no doubt in her at all, "because I embarrassed him in front of every fighter he has, and a man like Haddad can't let that stand. His authority is built on being the hunter, the one who always knows, the one who can't be beaten. A ghost beat him on that street, and until he kills that ghost with his own eyes, every man who follows him is quietly wondering if he still can. He won't send part of his force. He'll send all of it, because he needs everyone to watch him win." She paused. "I know how he thinks, Captain. I've been inside his head for 3 weeks. He'll come, and when he does, he'll bring the whole thing to us." They set the trap over the next 4 days. Evelyn chose the ground herself, a long, shallow rise east of the base, with a ridgeline that looked, to a hunter studying it, like the perfect place for a lone sniper to hide, with good fields of fire and clean escape routes, and 100 reasons for a shooter to choose it. What it also had, invisible to anyone who did not already know, were a dozen other positions, folds and cuts and blinds, where sniper teams could lie unseen, positions Evelyn walked and marked and assigned to the shooters Callahan brought her in ones and twos, in the dark, off every record. 9 sniper teams in the end. 18 men and women, the best precision shooters Callahan could vouch for with his life, brought in quietly and told only what they needed to know. That a ghost had saved Ranger 14, that the enemy who'd built that ambush was going to come for her, and that they were going to be there when he did. That was enough. It was more than enough. Half of them had known men who died in Al-Mazrah. All of them had walked patrol routes, wondering if today was the day the box closed around them. They came and they lay down in the positions Evelyn assigned, and they waited with the patience of people who had been waiting their whole careers for a chance to fight back against a thing they could never see. Brooks watched it all take shape and said quietly on the second night, "You've built an ambush for the man who builds ambushes." "I built him the ambush he'd build for himself," Evelyn said. "That's the only kind he'll walk into. If it looked like a trap, he'd smell it. It has to look exactly like the mistake he's been praying I'll make. One woman overconfident after beating him once, hiding alone on a ridge she thinks he can't find. She looked out at the dark rise. He thinks he's about to catch a ghost being careless. He's about to walk his whole network into the last night of its life. On the fifth day, the bait went into the water. It was done delicately through Whitfield, a fragment of intelligence allowed to slip into a channel they knew Vance monitored. A report of an unidentified, friendly sniper operating alone from a ridge east of Phoenix, believed to be the same shooter involved in the Ranger 14 incident. Position poorly secured, no supporting elements. It was exactly the meal Vance had been starving for. It named her location. It painted her as isolated and exposed. And it was, in every particular, a lie. Whitfield fed it into the system at 1400 and then did the hardest thing Evelyn had asked of him. He did nothing. He sat at his desk and waited and watched, with two officers he trusted absolutely positioned to witness whatever happened next, and he prayed that the thread would pull the way Evelyn said it would. It pulled. At 1630, Warrant Officer Elias Vance accessed the report. At 1655, he left his office. At 1710, a listening team Whitfield had placed on a frequency they'd long suspected, but never proven picked up a short transmission, encrypted, sent from a location inside the wire to a relay they had traced, weeks before, into Haddad's network. The transmission was brief. It did not need to be long. It carried a grid coordinate, a description, and 3 words that Whitfield's team decrypted an hour later, and that made the colonel close his eyes in grief and vindication all at once. The ghost is here. Vance had done it. He had reached into the American intelligence system, taken the location of an American soldier, and handed it to the enemy so that enemy could kill her. Whitfield had it, recorded, witnessed, traced on both ends, undeniable. But he did nothing still, because the plan required Vance to believe he was winning right up until the moment the whole thing collapsed on him, and one arrest made too early would warn Haddad off the trap that was about to close. Out on the ridge, Brooks got the word from Whitfield and passed it to Evelyn in 4 flat words. He took the bait. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then Haddad has my position. And Haddad is going to come. She keyed the net that connected her, quietly, to 9 hidden sniper teams and a base full of Rangers braced for what was coming. All stations, Shadow 2-1, the bait's been taken. Expect movement tonight. Everybody stays down, everybody stays quiet, and nobody fires until I call it. We only get this once. We let them commit. We let them believe. And then we take the whole thing. A breath. Rest while you can. It's going to be a long night. It came at 0230. Brooks saw them first, through the green wash of night optics, and his whisper carried the weight of a man watching a prophecy come true. Movement, east and south. A lot of it, Evelyn. This isn't a patrol. He was quiet a moment, counting. I've got vehicles, technicals, foot elements, spreading wide. This is, my God, this is everything. He brought everything. How many? 70, 80, more coming up behind, heavy weapons on the technicals. He's not raiding, Evelyn. He's assaulting. He means to overrun the whole base and dig you out of the middle of it. Brooks lowered the optic for 1 second and looked at her. You were right. You were right about all of it. He committed his entire network to killing one woman. Then his entire network is here, Evelyn said, in one place where we can reach on all of it. She keyed the net. All stations, Shadow 2-1, contact east and south, enemy in strength. This is the assault. Hold. Nobody fires. Let them close. Let them think it's working. Wait for my call, and when it comes, every one of you takes the target I gave you, and we take his whole command apart in the first 30 seconds. A pause. This is for every Ranger who walked into a box in this sector. Tonight we close the box on them. Hold. Hold. The enemy came on, confident, sure of their numbers, sure of their intelligence, sure that somewhere ahead of them in the dark lay a single exposed sniper who had gotten lucky once and would not get lucky again. They spread into their assault formation. The technicals rolled up to support. Fighters moved into position around a base they believed held only a handful of defenders and one arrogant ghost. They had no idea that 18 of the best shooters in the sector were watching them do it, each one already breathing on a target, each one waiting for a single word. Evelyn found Haddad through her scope. She had never seen his face before, but she knew him the instant she found him. The way she had known the man in gray by the doorway on that first day, from the posture, from the way the others oriented on him, from the invisible gravity that a commander carries. He was standing behind the assault line, near a technical, a radio in his hand, directing his forces with the calm certainty of a man who had never once lost. He was close enough now. He had brought himself close enough to watch his ghost die, and in doing so had brought himself into the reach of the very ghost he'd come to kill. "I've got him," Evelyn said softly. "I've got Haddad." "Take him," Brooks breathed. "End it right now." "No," she held. "Not yet. If I take him first, the network scatters in the dark and we spend 6 months hunting the pieces. We take the whole thing at once or we take none of it. His commanders first, his heavy weapons first, his communications first, everything that lets this stay organized. And Haddad last, so that when he falls, there's nothing left to inherit what he built." She keyed the net one final time, and her voice went out across the dark to 18 shooters holding their breath. "All stations, targets identified, on my shot." A breath in, half of it out. The stillness, the great and terrible stillness, spreading through her the way it always did. For the ones behind us. The rifle spoke, and the night came apart. 18 rifles fired in the space of 3 seconds, and across the enemy assault line, Haddad's command structure simply ceased to exist. The men directing the technicals died. The men coordinating the foot elements died. The communications operators, the heavy weapons crews, the section leaders, every man whose death would turn an organized assault into a leaderless mob, died in the first half minute, dropped by shooters they could not see from angles they could not have imagined. And the great confident assault that Haddad had launched to kill one woman shattered against the discovery that the woman had been waiting for him with an army of ghosts. "Direct hits across the board," Brooks called, his voice tight and fierce. "Command element's gone, Evelyn. Their whole command element is down. They're leaderless. They're firing wild. They don't know where it's coming from. They don't know how many we are." He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "It's the street all over again." "It's exactly the street, except this time it's their whole network in the box." Down below, chaos took the enemy the way it had taken Ranger 14 4 days before, except that these men had no calm voice on a radio to give them back their courage. They had walked into a killing ground of their own making, and the hunter who had built it was picking them apart. And they broke the way men break when they discover that everything they believed about a battle was a lie. But Haddad did not break. Evelyn watched him through her scope, and even in the ruin of his assault, even with his command dead around him, Kareem Haddad did not run. He stood behind the technical, and he keyed his radio, and he tried, with everything he had, to pull his shattered force back together. And Evelyn felt something that was almost respect for the man. The same terrible discipline she recognized because she carried it herself. He was good. He had always been good. He had killed Rangers for 8 months because he was good. And even now, in the last minutes of everything he had built, he was fighting to hold it together. Then a technical broke from the collapsing assault, an armored truck heavy with explosives, and it turned toward the base entrance and began to accelerate, a last desperate strike meant to punch through the gate and take the defenders with it in one final blast. And Evelyn understood in an instant that 30 Rangers holding that entrance would die if that truck reached them. "Vehicle!" Brooks shouted. "Suicide vehicle, Evelyn. It's going for the gate. It's going to reach the gate." The truck was moving fast, armored. The driver hunched low behind steel, almost nothing of him exposed, and the range was long and growing longer as the vehicle raced away from her toward the gate. It was the kind of shot that did not exist, the kind of shot people invented for stories. A driver behind armor, in the dark, at hundreds of meters, moving at speed, with 30 lives riding on a single bullet through a gap the size of a hand. Evelyn Carter did not think about whether it was possible. She had stopped thinking about possible a long time ago. She thought only about the 30 men at that gate and the families behind them, and the whole reason she had ever picked up a rifle in the first place. And she found the tiny black slot in the armor where a driver had to see the road through, and she let it, and she breathed, and she fired. The truck swerved, slowed, and rolled to a stop 100 meters short of the gate. Its driver slumped behind the wheel, its explosives silent. 30 Rangers lived because of one shot, one breath, one woman who had refused to accept that a thing was impossible when lives depended on it being done. Hit, Brooks whispered, and his voice had gone somewhere past disbelief. You hit the driver, through the slot. At that range, in the dark, moving Evelyn. Evelyn, that's not a shot a human being makes. It is if they have to, she said quietly. Now find me Haddad. But Haddad had seen the truck fall, had seen his last card played and beaten, and at long last, Kareem Haddad understood that he had lost. Not a battle. Everything. His network was dead around him. His finest fighters were scattered and dying. The ghost he had come to kill had built him a trap inside his own trap and closed it with a precision that mirrored his own. And there was, in the whole burning ruin of his assault, nothing left to command. He turned to run. And Evelyn Carter, who had waited all night for this, who had held her fire on the one man she most wanted so that she could take everything he'd built first, found him in her scope one final time. She knew what taking the shot would mean. She knew it exposed her position. She knew that whatever fighters were left would orient on her muzzle and come for her with everything they had. But she also knew that Kareem Haddad had killed Rangers for 8 months, had built the box that took Ramirez, had shaken Callahan's hand at the funeral of a man he'd murdered, and that every day he drew breath was another day some Ranger somewhere walked toward a grave he'd dug for them. She waited. She calculated. She breathed. She fired. Kareem Haddad fell and did not rise. And with him fell the entire network he had spent 8 months building into the deadliest thing in Al Mazrah. Leaderless, shattered, its command gone and its master dead, the great assault dissolved into men running in the dark, throwing down their weapons, fleeing from an enemy they had never once been able to see. And inside the wire, the thread pulled tight. The moment Haddad's assault collapsed, his network went to pieces on the airwaves. And in the chaos, one last frantic transmission went out from a fighter trying to reach the man who had promised them the ghost location. A transmission that named the frequency, the relay, the whole path back through the wire, and Colonel Marcus Whitfield, listening with 2 witnesses at his side, finally had every piece he needed. He rose from his desk, he walked down the hall, and he opened the door to an office with a nameplate that read Elias Vance. And he found the warrant officer standing over his own radio, and Whitfield spoke 4 words that ended 8 months of murder. Vance, step away from that. Vance turned, and for one instant, the mask he had worn for a year slipped, and Whitfield saw the thing underneath. The cold and patient nothing that had fed Rangers to their deaths and shaken their captains' hands at the funerals. Then the mask came back, smooth and practiced, and Vance opened his mouth to explain, to deflect, to spin the same careful lie that had protected him for a year. Don't, Whitfield said. We have the transmission. We have the relay. We have 3 words you sent to Kareem Haddad 4 hours ago. The ghost is here. He let that land. She was here, Vance. She's been here the whole time. And she just took your whole network apart in a single night and left us a trail that leads straight to this desk. It's over. You're done. Get on your knees. And Warrant Officer Elias Vance, the man who had built a war out of other men's deaths, the hunter inside the wire who had never once been suspected, sank to his knees in his own office as the weight of everything he had done finally arrived to collect what it was owed. By sunrise, the ridge east of Phoenix was silent. The enemy who had fled were being rounded up. The technicals sat burning in the pale light. And around the base and along the rise, 18 exhausted shooters were rising from positions they had held all night and coming together and looking at each other with the dazed expressions of people who had done a thing they would spend the rest of their lives struggling to believe. Not one Ranger had died, not one. Against a network 80 strong, against a suicide vehicle, against the deadliest enemy the sector had ever known, the Rangers had taken 0 friendly deaths. And the reason was standing on a ridge breaking down her rifle with steady hands, a woman most of them had never seen and never would. Captain Ethan Callahan found Brooks first, at the base of the ridge, and gripped the spotter's hand hard. Where is she? Brooks looked back up the rise, toward the fold of ground where a ghost was already gathering her gear to disappear the way she always did. Up there, but Captain, he paused. She won't want a crowd. She never does. The best thing she does where no one can see it. That's what she told Ranger 14. and she meant it. Callahan looked up at the ridge for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, and he did not climb it. Instead, he keyed his radio one last time on the net that had connected them through the worst and the best nights of his life, and he said the only thing that mattered. Shadow 2-1, Ranger, actual. It's done. Haddad's finished. Vance is in custody. Every man who walked out here last night is walking home. His voice broke, and he let it. You did it. You saved this whole sector. And I know you're going to buy my voice now because that's who you are. But I need you to hear one thing before you go. He swallowed. There are men alive this morning who don't know your name and never will. Their kids are going to grow up with fathers. Their wives are going to grow old with husbands, and they'll never know it was you. But I'll know. Every one of us up here will know, and we will carry it for the rest of our lives. Thank you, Shadow 2-1. From all of us, thank you. There was a long silence on the net, and then one final time, quiet and calm and warm, in a way it had never quite let itself be before, the voice came back. Take them home, Captain, Evelyn Carter said. That's all I ever wanted. Take them home. The net went quiet, and up on the ridge, the ghost who had changed the whole war gathered the last of her gear, took one long look at the base full of men who would live because of her, and slipped away into the rock, unseen, the way she had always been. The Guardian nobody watched, carrying her 15 and her 4 and her 12, and every soul she had ever stood between in the dark, into a dawn that belonged, because of her, to the living. The disappearing did not last as long as she wanted it to. Evelyn Carter had meant to vanish the way she always vanished, to fold herself back into the quiet and let the story of that night become just another rumor the Rangers told each other, a ghost with a rifle who came when men prayed and left before they could thank her. But some stories are too big to stay quiet, and what happened east of Phoenix was too big by far. 18 shooters had lain in the dark and watched her take an entire network apart. 30 men had lived because she put a bullet through a slot in armor that no one believed she could hit. 12 Rangers walked around Base Phoenix telling anyone who would listen that a woman on a radio had reached into the worst moment of their lives and pulled them out of it. And a warrant officer named Elias Vance sat in a cell, and the case against him grew, and every thread of it led back to the same source. The ghost had not only broken Haddad's network, she had exposed the traitor who ran it from inside the wire. There was no keeping a thing like that in the shadows, no matter how badly she wanted to stay there. Colonel Marcus Whitfield came to find her himself 3 weeks later in a corner of Fort Liberty where she had gone to be forgotten. He did not bring an entourage. He came alone, an old man with tired eyes, and he sat down across from her and folded his hands and said the thing he had come to say. They want to give you the Silver Star, Carter. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. I don't want it, sir. I know you don't. Whitfield almost smiled. You've never wanted a single thing that came with your name attached to it. That's part of what makes you what you are. He leaned forward. But I need you to take it. Not for you, for them, for the men you saved. Because right now there are 12 Rangers and 18 shooters and 30 men who held a gate. And every one of them is carrying a debt they don't know how to pay. And the only thing that lets a soldier set down a debt like that is watching the person who earned it get what they're owed. You take that medal, Carter, and you let them stand there and watch, and you give them the one thing they need. You let them say thank you in the only way the Army knows how. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. She thought about the little boy inside every one of those men, the part of a soldier that never fully grows up, that needs to believe the world is fair enough to reward the people who do right. She thought about Hayes, her old mentor, who had told her the whole job was the people behind you, and she understood that letting these men thank her was itself one last thing she could do for the ones behind her. All right, sir, she said quietly. For them, not for me. For them, Whitfield agreed. It was always for them. With you, it was always only ever for them. The ceremony was held at Fort Liberty on a clear morning, and Evelyn Carter stood on the stage in her dress uniform and felt more exposed than she had ever felt on any ridge, because a ridge she could hide on and a stage she could not. She kept her eyes forward and her hands still, and she endured it the way she endured the long stillness before a shot, by breathing, by narrowing the world down to the thing that had to be done. Captain Ethan Callahan was there. He had flown in for it, and he stood in the front row with his wife and his young daughter, And when Evelyn's eyes finally found his, something passed between them that needed no words at all. The whole of that first terrible night, the box, the prayer, the voice, the door cut open with a rifle and a promise. Callahan did not smile. He simply put his hand over his heart and held it there. And Evelyn had to look away because a sniper does not cry on a stage in front of the whole battalion. When the citation was read, it was read carefully, stripped of the classified pieces. But everyone in that formation knew what it meant. Extraordinary heroism, repeated disregard for her own safety, the rescue of Ranger Team 14 against impossible odds, the defense of Ranger Base Phoenix, 0 friendly deaths across the entire operation. And though the citation could not name the network she had broken or the traitor she had exposed, the men in that formation had heard the whispers, and they stood a little straighter, knowing they were in the presence of the ghost the whole sector had been talking about. The medal was pinned, the formation was dismissed, and then the thing happened that Evelyn had not planned for, the thing that broke through the stillness she had wrapped around herself all morning. Callahan's daughter came up to the stage. She was maybe 6 years old, in a dress her mother had clearly picked for the occasion, and she walked up to Evelyn Carter with the fearless directness that only small children have, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. She stopped in front of the woman who had saved her father, and she looked up and she held out the paper. "I made you a picture," she said. Evelyn knelt down. It was somehow harder than any shot she had ever taken, harder than the driver behind the armor, harder than Haddad in the dark. She took the folded paper in hands that had been steady through every impossible thing and were not quite steady now, and she opened it. It was a drawing, the kind a 6-year-old makes, bright crayon on white paper. It showed a soldier with a rifle standing tall, and behind the soldier was a little house with a family in the window. A mother and a father and a child, and the soldier stood between the house and a dark scribbled edge that a child had drawn to mean everything bad in the world. The soldier stood between the family and the dark, and underneath, in careful, wobbling letters, the little girl had written 4 words. "You brought Daddy home." Evelyn Carter looked at that drawing for a long, long time. "You're the reason my dad came home," the little girl said, in the plain and certain way of a child who has been told the truth by people who love her. "Mommy said you're a hero. Are you a hero?" And Evelyn, kneeling on that stage with a silver star on her chest and a child's drawing in her hands, gave the little girl the only honest answer she had. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm not a hero. I'm just somebody who had a job to do, and the job was making sure your daddy came home to you." She looked up at Callahan standing behind his daughter, with tears running openly down his face, a captain who had led men through hell and was not ashamed to weep in front of the whole battalion. And he did. That's all that matters. He came home. The little girl considered this with great seriousness. Then she wrapped her arms around Evelyn's neck and hugged her, the fierce and total hug of a child, and whispered, "Thank you for my daddy." And Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter, who had never once broken on any battlefield, who had held herself still through the deaths of 15 men and the loss of 4 Rangers she could not save, who had made the impossible shot with a heart that never wavered, held that little girl and finally, quietly, let herself feel all of it. Every life she had taken, every life she had saved, every family that had stayed whole because she was willing to carry the weight that kept them that way. She held the child, and she did not let the formation see her face. And for one moment, the guardian in the shadows let herself simply be a woman who was very, very tired and who had, at last, been thanked. She did not stay in the field much longer after that. It was not fear that pulled her back. Evelyn Carter had never once been ruled by fear. It was something quieter and truer, the understanding that arrives in a soldier when they have given the war everything it can rightfully ask, and that the best thing they can do now is make sure the ones who come after are ready for what waits for them out there. She requested a transfer to the sniper training program at Fort Liberty, and Whitfield approved it before the ink was dry, and Evelyn traded the ridge for the range and the enemy for a line of young shooters who did not yet understand what the rifle in their hands would ask of them. She was a hard instructor, not cruel, never cruel, but hard, because she had learned that the range was the only mercy she could give them, the only place where a lesson learned did not cost a life. She taught them wind and distance and the endless patience that separated a shooter from a marksman, She taught them to be still. She taught them to disappear. And on the last day of every course, when the shooting was done and the young soldiers thought they had learned everything the program had to teach, she sat them down and taught them the one thing that mattered more than all the rest. Everything I've shown you, she would tell them, the wind, the range, the ballistics, all of it, that's the easy part. Any of you can learn to hit a target. The hard part, the part that'll keep you up at night for the rest of your lives, is remembering what the target is for. She would look at them, one at a time, until each young face understood she was speaking directly to them. A sniper's job is not to take lives. Anybody with a rifle and a steady hand can take a life. Your job is to save lives. Every time you put your eye to that scope, there is somebody behind you who needs to come home, and you are the last thing standing between them and a war that wants to take them. You're not there to be the deadliest shooter on the field. You're there to be the strongest protector. You remember that, and you'll never once be a killer. You'll be a guardian, and that's the only thing worth being. They did not always understand her, the young ones, not right away. But years later, when they had been out there themselves, when they had lain in the dark and made the choice that only a sniper has to make, they understood every word, and they passed it on to the shooters who came after them. And in that way, the thing Hayes had given Evelyn, and Evelyn had given them, moved forward through the years, from teacher to student to teacher again. A chain of guardians reaching into a future none of them would live to see. Elias Vance was convicted. The trial was closed. Most of it, the classified pieces, sealed away. But the outcome was not in doubt. The transmission Whitfield had captured, the 3 words sent to Haddad, the relay traced on both ends, the pattern of Ranger deaths that lined up too perfectly with the intelligence Vance had touched. It was all there, undeniable, and Warrant Officer Elias Vance was sentenced to spend the rest of his life paying for the men he had murdered. He never explained himself. He never showed remorse. He sat through his sentencing with the same cold and patient nothing Whitfield had seen the moment the mask slipped, and when they led him away, he did not look back. Evelyn did not attend. She had no need to watch him fall. She had done her part, out in the dark, on a ridge with a rifle, and the falling was for other people to finish. But she thought about him sometimes. In the quiet, the man who had built a war out of other people's deaths and shaken the hands of the captains whose men he'd killed. And she understood in a way she could not have explained to the young shooters on a range that the difference between her and a man like Vance was not skill, and it was not courage, and it was not even the side they fought on. The difference was who they carried. Vance had carried only himself. Evelyn had carried everyone behind her. And in the end, that was the only thing that had ever separated a guardian from a monster. The years passed the way years do. The war in El Mazrah wound down, and then it ended, and the sector that had once been the deadliest ground for American Rangers became just a name in a history few people read. The men who had lived because of Evelyn Carter went home and grew older. Willis kept his leg and became a high school football coach in Ohio, and every year he told his players about a night in the desert when he should have died, and a voice on a radio that would not let him. Kane saw his kids grow up and then saw their kids, and he kept a photograph in his wallet, not of a woman because he had never seen her face, but of the empty desert ridge where he knew she had lain, printed from a satellite map, a picture of the place where a stranger had saved his life. Doyle's arm healed and he stayed in the Army 20 more years. And when young soldiers asked him why, he told them about the ghost and about a debt that could only be repaid by becoming the kind of soldier she would have been proud of. And Ethan Callahan, who rose to colonel and then to general, who commanded thousands of men over a long and distinguished career, kept a child's crayon drawing framed on the wall of every office he ever held. A soldier with a rifle, a family in a window, and 4 words in a little girl's careful hand. You brought Daddy home? Visitors would ask about it, and General Callahan would tell them the same thing every time. That's the most important thing that ever happened to me, he would say. And the person who made it happen, most of you will never hear her name. That's how she wanted it. The best thing she ever did, she did where nobody could see. But I saw it, and I have spent my whole life trying to be worth it. Evelyn Carter grew older too, on her range at Fort Liberty, teaching the young ones, being still, disappearing into the ordinary life she had earned. She never married, though it was not for lack of chances, because the thing that had made her what she was on the battlefield had made her private in a way that few people could reach. But she was not lonely, not the way people assumed. She had her students, she had the chain of guardians she was building, one course at a time, and she had the quiet certainty carried in the place in Maud her where she kept the cost of her work, that somewhere out there were families whole because of her, children who had grown up with fathers, husbands who had grown old with wives, whole lives that had unfolded across the years for one reason and one reason only. Because on the days when it mattered most, she had been willing to stand between them and the dark. She retired eventually the way all soldiers do. There was a ceremony smaller than the first, and she endured it the same way, by being still. And when it was over, and the uniform was folded away for the last time, an old ranger came up to her, a man she did not recognize at first, gray now, walking with a slight limp, and he took her hand in both of his and held it. "You won't remember me," he said. "There's no reason you would. I was 19 years old, and I was hiding behind a burning truck in a street in Al-Masra, and I was praying because I was sure I was about to die." His voice shook. And then a voice came on the radio, and it was so calm, and it told us to keep our heads down and trust you. "My name is Cole, ma'am. I was in that box. I've had 40 years of life I wasn't supposed to have. I got married. I have 3 kids and 6 grandkids. And I have spent every one of those 40 years wanting to find you, just to say the thing I never got to say." Evelyn looked at the old man, and behind the gray and the years she found somewhere, the frightened boy who had prayed behind a truck, and something in her chest that she kept very carefully locked came quietly open. "Say it," she said gently. And Cole, 70 years old now, wept the way he had wept as a boy in a wadi 40 years before. And he said, "Thank you for all of it, for all 40 years, thank you." Evelyn Carter held the old man's hands, and she did not tell him she was not a hero, because she had learned over a long life that there were times to let people give you the thing they had carried for so long. Instead, she said the only thing that had ever been true, the thing Hayes had taught her, and she had taught 100 students, and that had guided every shot she had ever taken. "You had people behind you," she said, "and so did I. That's the whole thing, Cole. That's the only thing. You go home to those grandkids. You love them the way you were meant to. That's the payment. That's all I ever wanted. That was always all I ever wanted." He nodded, unable to speak, and he let go of her hands, and he walked away into the rest of his life. And Evelyn Carter stood alone in the emptying room, an old soldier now, a retired instructor whose name most of the world would never know, and she felt the whole of it settle over her one last time. The 15 she had ended on that first day, the 4 she could not save, the 12 she had gotten out of the box, the 30 at the gate, the whole sector, the chain of guardians she had built, the family's whole across 40 years, the debt paid and the debt owed, and the terrible arithmetic of a life spent standing between people and the dark. She had never wanted to be a legend. She had never wanted the medal or the stage or the name in a citation. She had wanted only one thing from the first day to the last, and she had gotten it more times than she could ever count. The people behind her had come home. Years later, long after she was gone, Rangers still told the story. They told it in barracks and in bars and around fires in places the Army sent them. The story of the night a team was trapped in a killing box and prayed for a savior, and the moment a woman with a sniper rifle answered. They told it because it was true and because it reminded them of the thing that was easy to forget in a hard profession. That the point of all of it, the wind and the range and the steady hand, was never the taking of a life. It was the saving of one. The story changed a little in the telling, the way all true stories do, but the heart of it never changed, and it always ended the same way. She did not answer with promises. She did not answer with words. She answered with precision and with courage and with a willingness to carry a weight that few people could understand, so that the men behind her could set their own weight down and go home. She was the guardian in the shadows. And because she was willing to stand where no one could see her, so that others could stand in the light, whole families lived and grew old across all the long years, never once knowing the name of the woman who had given them everything and never once needing to. She had asked for nothing. She had wanted nothing. She had given everything. That is the truth of Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter, and it will not be forgotten. Sometimes the person standing between life and death is the one nobody sees. And she stood there, without flinching, for all of them until the very end. Long after the war in the quiet years, there was a wooden box that Evelyn Carter kept on the top shelf of her closet, and she never once opened it in front of another living soul. It was an old ammunition box, the metal kind, painted over and dented at one corner, and inside it were letters. Dozens of them. She had written them over the years, one at a time, on the nights when the weight of the arithmetic grew too heavy to carry alone, and every one of them was addressed to a person who would never read it. Some were to the men she had saved, some were to the men she had killed, and some, the hardest ones, the ones written in a hand that shook, were to the 4 Rangers she had not been able to save, the 4 who died walking into a compound that was never a weapons cache, killed by a traitor's lie before she had ever known his name. She had never sent a single letter. She had never meant to. Writing them was not about being read. It was the only way she knew to set a thing stone without letting go of it entirely. The only way to honor a debt she would carry to her grave. And so the box filled, year by year, with all the words she had never spoken to anyone. The truest things she had ever written, sealed away above her head while she slept. She was 73 years old when the young woman came to find her. Evelyn was living alone by then, in a small house near the coast of North Carolina, close enough to Fort Liberty that she could still smell the pines when the wind came right, far enough that no one bothered her. She kept a garden. She read in the evenings. She had made her peace as much as a person like her ever makes peace, with a quiet life earned by a loud one. And on a spring afternoon there was a knock at her door, and when she opened it, a young woman in an army uniform stood on her porch, a captain, maybe 30 years old, holding her hat in both hands and looking at Evelyn with an expression that Evelyn had seen before, a very long time ago, on the face of a little girl holding a crayon drawing. "Staff Sergeant Carter?" the young woman said. "I'm sorry to come without calling. My name is Captain Sarah Callahan." She swallowed. "My grandfather was Ethan Callahan." Evelyn went very still, the old stillness, the one that had never left her. "Ethan," she said quietly. "How is he?" And she saw the answer in the young woman's face before Sarah Callahan said a word, and something in Evelyn's chest, something that had held for 50 years, folded quietly inward. "He passed last month, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice careful. "In his sleep. He was 91. He had a good long life." She paused, gathering herself. "A life he always said he wasn't supposed to have, because of you." Evelyn stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "Please, come in." They sat in the small living room with the coastal light coming through the windows, and Sarah Callahan told her about the old general's last years, about the drawing that had hung on his wall in every office, and then in his study when he retired, the soldier with a rifle, and the family in the window, and the 4 crayon words. She told Evelyn that her grandfather had spoken of the ghost her whole life, that she had grown up on the story, that it was the reason she herself had joined the army, the reason she had gone into intelligence, the reason she had spent her career trying to make sure that no team ever again walked into a box because someone inside the wire had failed them. "He never knew your name," Sarah said, "not for years. The mission was classified so deep that even he, a general, couldn't get to it. But at the end, when he knew he didn't have long, he called in every favor he had earned in 70 years of service, and he found out. He found your name, ma'am, Evelyn Carter, and he made me promise something." "What did he make you promise?" Evelyn asked softly. Sarah reached into her bag and drew out an envelope, worn at the edges, as if it had been handled many times. "He wrote you a letter," she said, "the last thing he ever wrote, near enough. He made me promise I'd find you and put it in your hands myself. He said a voice on a radio saved his whole team when he was 31 years old, and he'd spent 60 years trying to be worth it. And the least he could do was make sure the person who did it heard from him one time before the end." Her own eyes were wet now. "So here I am, ma'am, keeping my grandfather's last promise." Evelyn took the envelope in hands that had been steady through every impossible thing and were not quite steady now, the same way they had not been steady 50 years before, kneeling on a stage with a child's drawing. She opened it carefully, and she read the words of a man she had spoken to across a radio in the worst moment of both their lives, a man whose face she had seen only a handful of times, a man who had put his hand over his heart in a crowded formation and told her everything without saying anything at all. The letter was not long. Callahan had never been a man of many words when the few would do. He wrote that he had thought of her every single day of his life. He wrote that he had 6 grandchildren and 11 great-grandchildren, and that every one of them existed because of a decision she made on a ridge on a scorching afternoon, and that he had never once forgotten it. He wrote that he had tried to live a life worthy of the gift she gave him, and that he hoped he had, and that if he had done any good in the world at all is 70 years of service, then that good was hers as much as his, because she was the reason he had lived to do it. And at the end, he wrote the thing that broke her. You told my radio operator we didn't owe you thanks. You said we owed our families a hug when we got home. I have given a lot of hugs, Evelyn, 60 years of them, and every single one I gave in your name. I don't know if you ever married, if you ever had children of your own, but I want you to know that you have a family. It's the largest family in the world. It's every person who is alive because someone you saved came home. We are all your children in a way, and we love you. We have always loved you. Thank you for my life. Thank you for all of it. Rest easy, Guardian. You did the whole job, and you did it right. Ethan. Evelyn Carter lowered the letter, and she sat for a long moment in the coastal light. And then she did a thing she had done only twice before in her whole life. Once on a stage with a little girl's arms around her neck, and once in a wadi in her heart on the night it all began. She let herself weep. Not the tears of grief alone, though there was grief in them, for Ethan and for the years and for the 4 she never saved. But something more than grief. The tears of a person who has carried a weight for 50 years and is told at last by someone who understood exactly what it cost that the weight had been worth carrying. Sarah Callahan sat with her and did not speak and let the old soldier have her moment, the way her grandfather had known to let the ghost stay a ghost all those years ago. When Evelyn could speak again, she wiped her eyes and looked at the young captain, and she saw so much of Ethan in her, the same steadiness, the same quiet decency, that it made her chest ache. Your grandfather was the finest man I never knew, she said. We spoke maybe 6 times in our whole lives, most of it over a radio in the middle of the worst day either of us ever had. And I have thought about him every day too. Isn't that a strange thing? 2 people who barely met, carrying each other across 50 years. She shook her head slowly. He kept his promise. He always kept his promises, even his last one. He said you'd say something like that, Sarah said with a small, watery smile. He said you'd deflect. He said the ghost never took credit for anything. Not once, not in her whole life. He told me, when I found you, not to let you get away with it. She leaned forward. So I'm not going to, ma'am. My grandfather's team lived. 30 men at that gate lived. A whole sector lived. My family exists. I exist. And I need you to hear me say it, the way he needed you to hear him. Thank you, from all of us, from every one of us who came after. Evelyn looked at the young woman, this granddaughter of a captain she had saved a lifetime ago, this living proof that a decision made in a single terrible minute had rippled forward across half a century into a future she would never have imagined. And she understood, finally and completely, the thing that Hayes had tried to teach her when she was young and had only truly grasped now that she was old. The people behind her had never been just the ones in the box. They were the ones in the box would go on to save, and the ones those people would save. A chain reaching forward through time, life leading to life leading to life, every link forged in a moment when one person chose to stand between another and the dark. She had thought all those years that she was protecting 12 men, 30 men, a sector. She had been protecting a future. Sarah Callahan was sitting in her living room because of it, and Sarah Callahan would protect people too, and they would protect others, on and on, past the end of Evelyn's life and the end of Sarah's, a river of the living flowing forward from a single ridge on a single afternoon. Can I ask you something, ma'am? Sarah said. Something my grandfather always wondered about and never got to ask? Ask. That night, on the street, when you first got on the radio and told them to keep their heads down. Sarah's brow furrowed. You'd been sent on a classified mission. Taking those shots blew weeks of work. It turned you into a target. It set that whole traitor in motion against you. You knew all of that in the moment before you fired the first round. My grandfather always said he could hear it in your voice, that you understood exactly what it was going to cost you. She looked at Evelyn with her grandfather's eyes. Why did you do it? Knowing what it would get white him. And Evelyn Carter, 73 years old, with Ethan Callahan's last letter in her lap, and his granddaughter in her living room and 50 years of silence behind her, gave the answer she had never given anyone, the answer she had written in 100 letters she never sent, the answer that was the whole truth of her life. Because I could hear them praying, she said quietly. On the radio, before your grandfather ever made his call, I could hear the boys behind him praying. And I had a teacher once, a long time ago, a man named Hayes, who told me something I never forgot. He said a sniper doesn't pull the trigger because they hate the enemy. They pull the trigger because someone behind them needs to come home. She paused and her voice grew very soft. I heard those boys praying to come home, and I was the only one who could hear them. And I decided that whatever it cost me, no one was going to pray to come home while I lay on a ridge and did nothing about it. That's all. It was never braver than that. It was never more complicated than that. Someone needed to come home, and I was there. So I brought them home. Sarah Callahan was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's the most important thing anyone has ever said to me." "It's the most important thing anyone ever said to me," Evelyn replied. "I just passed it on." That's all any of us do, in the end. We pass it on. They talked for hours after that, the old guardian and the young captain. And when the light began to fail, Evelyn rose and went to her closet, and she took down the wooden ammunition box she had never opened in front of another soul. She carried it to the living room and set it on the table between them, and she opened it, and Sarah saw the letters, dozens of them yellowing tight in bundles. "These are for the ones I saved," Evelyn said, "and the ones I couldn't, and the ones I had to stop. I've been writing them for 50 years. I never sent one. I never meant to." She drew out a bundle, thicker than the rest, tied with a faded ribbon. "But these are the ones I wrote to your grandfather, over the years. Every time I thought of him, which was often, I could never send them because I didn't know where he was, and because sending them would have meant breaking the silence I'd wrapped around all of it." She held the bundle out. "But you're here now, and he kept his last promise to me, so I'd like to keep one to him. Take these, read them, or don't. But they're his. They were always his. 50 years of the words I never got to say to the finest man I never knew." Sarah took the bundle of letters in both hands, the way you take something sacred, and she pressed it to her chest, and she could not speak. "Tell your family about him," Evelyn said, "and tell them about the war, and the box, and the night the Rangers prayed for a savior. But when you tell them the ending, Sarah, don't tell them it was me. Tell them it was all of us. Tell them it was your grandfather, who trusted a voice he'd never heard. Tell them it was Brooks, who followed me into an impossible thing every single time. Tell them it was 18 shooters who lay in the dark and waited. Tell them it was Colonel Whitfield, who caught a traitor with 3 words. Tell them it was Cole, a 19-year-old boy who prayed behind a truck and lived to be 70 and came to thank me at the end." Her voice was steady now, and sure, the voice that had reached into a killing box and given 12 men back their lives. The ghost is a nice story, but it was never one person. It was all of us standing between the people we loved and the dark. That's the true ending. That's the one worth telling. Sarah Callahan stayed until the stars came out, and then she rose to go, and at the door she turned and did the thing her grandfather had done in a formation 50 years before. She put her hand over her heart, and she held it there. And Evelyn Carter, the guardian in the shadows, put her own hand over her own heart. And the two of them stood like that for a moment in the doorway, an old woman and a young one, a savior and the granddaughter of the saved, and no words passed between them because none were needed. Then Sarah drove away into the night, carrying 50 years of letters and the true ending of a story that would now be told for another 50 years, and another, as long as there were people alive to tell it. Evelyn Carter lived 4 more years after that. They were good years, the best of her long life, because for the first time she was not alone with the weight. Sarah came often and brought her children, and Evelyn told them stories, not of the killing but of the saving, and the little ones sat wide-eyed and asked her if she was really a hero, and Evelyn gave them the answer she had given a little girl on a stage a lifetime before. "No, sweetheart," she would say, I'm just somebody who had a job to do, and the job was making sure people came home. She passed in her sleep on a spring night with the smell of the pines coming through the window on the right kind of wind. And at her funeral, which was small because she had asked for it to be small, a strange thing happened that no one had planned. They came anyway. Old men, gray and limping, from all over the country, sons and daughters and grandchildren of men she had saved. Young soldiers she had trained and the soldiers they had trained. A whole quiet river of the living flowing to the grave of a woman most of them had never met, to stand for a moment beside the guardian who had made their lives possible. Cole was too old to travel by then, but he sent his grandson, who read aloud, at the graveside, the words his grandfather had wanted said. And Sarah Callahan, now a colonel herself, stood before them all and told the true ending, the one Evelyn had asked for, the one where it was never one person but all of them, standing between the ones they loved and the dark. And then Sarah did one last thing. She took from her pocket a single sheet of paper, worn soft with handling, and she held it up so they could all see it. It was a child's drawing in bright crayon, a soldier with a rifle, a family in a window, a dark scribbled edge held back, and 4 words in careful, wobbling letters. You brought Daddy home. My grandfather carried this his whole life, Sarah said. He said it was the most important thing that ever happened to him, and now it belongs to all of us. She looked out at the river of the living, at the old men and the children and the soldiers young and gray. She brought our daddies home, and our grandfathers, and our great-grandfathers. She stood where no one could see her so that we could all stand here in the light. Every one of us is alive because of a chain that started with her, and it will not end with us. We will bring people home too, and they will bring others. And somewhere down all the long years, a child who has never heard her name will grow up safe and whole, because on a scorching afternoon a very long time ago, a woman on a ridge heard someone praying to come home, and she decided that no one would pray in vain while she was there to answer. The wind moved through the pines, and the river of the living stood in silence beside the grave of the guardian who had given them everything and asked for nothing, and every one of them, old and young alike, put a hand over their heart. She had never wanted to be a legend. She had wanted only one thing, from the first day to the last, and across a long life and a longer legacy, she had gotten it more times than any person could ever count. The people behind her came home, and they always would.